In our series called Foundations, where Jesus taught a principle about this, both in the book of Matthew chapter 7, if you want to read the same story, and the passage we're looking at today, Luke chapter 6, starting in verse 47. Here's what he said. He said, "As for everyone who comes to me and hears my words and puts them into practice, I will show you what they are like. They are like a man building a house who dug down deep and laid the foundation on rock. And when the flood came, the torrent struck the house but could not shake it because it was well built." He actually goes on to say the opposite is true. Another person didn't dig deep for a foundation, and when the storm hit, the house fell with a great crash. Today, we're going to take a look at a different part of the story. We've been looking at both of them, both in Matthew 7 and this one. And what I wanted to show you is that we've looked at things like, hey, how to remove the sand in your life. That in Matthew 7, it kind of mentioned sand. And we said, hey, we got to get the sand out of our life so we can build on the real foundation. Then we took a look at the storm. What are the storms in our lives? And what does it reveal? That's the part that we looked at. And then last week, we talked about how to build on the rock. Today we're going to look at something a little bit different. In fact, it's found in verse 48. It says that they dug down deep. That's what we want to look at. Why is it important to dig deep? We want to kind of go deep a little bit today, but it's important. I did some study, and I'm not a builder. Some of you guys are, so you'll understand this. But I did some studying a while back. I was just watching some documentaries on large buildings, and this one here in particular, the Empire State Building. And that's a picture of the excavation work that they have to do to build these big skyscrapers. They don't start by building. They start by digging. It doesn't seem right, does it? But it's super important for the if you want to enter a building, it's super important that they actually dig down deep. And I didn't know how deep they go, but sometimes they go hundreds of feet down before they go up. That's important. It gives integrity to the building. Jesus wasn't talking about concrete. Jesus wasn't talking about excavating real dirt. He's talking about our lives. That just like they dig deep to do this, it's hidden work. Does that make sense? You don't see that. When you go to see the Empire, I've been on the Empire State Building, and I'll tell you, when I went there, you don't see the hidden work that's below. But it is important that if you're going to go up as high as these buildings are, you want to know that you got a deep foundation. They stand the storms. And that's what Jesus is talking about in our lives. So how can we dig deep? That's what we want to talk about today. What I love about the Bible is that it doesn't just tell us principles. It actually demonstrates those principles through real stories. And today, we're going to take a look at David, a man who became the greatest king of Israel. And I want to read a passage that comes in kind of the first part of his life. David, at the first part of his life, was a shepherd boy who lived out in a little podunk town in the middle of nowhere called Zunah. No, I'm sorry. It's not Zunah, right? Sorry. I was thinking of my story for a second. But believe it or not, Bethlehem and Zunah have a lot in common. That's where he was from. He's from a little place. And he was anointed king at a very young age. And after he was anointed king, he then launched into superstardom when, as a young boy, he killed a giant named Goliath. That was an amazing feat that he had, that God empowered him to do. But it's what comes after that a lot of people don't know. What came immediately after that was superstardom. And that was good for him. He was anointed king, and it seemed like everything was going up, and he was actually close to the king who did not realize he would be his successor. That was another thing. It was kind of hidden. And then something happened to him, which was the king got jealous. Have you ever seen people do that? He didn't know David was anointed, but he knew everybody loved David more than him. And that just infuriated him. So he went crazy, and he tried to kill David. You'd have to understand how David felt about him. He was like a father to him. You ever had crazy family? It's funny until it's not, right? And he chased him. And he had to leave. And he left everything that he knew. And he was in the middle of nowhere. In fact, he wasn't just in the middle of nowhere. You know where he hid? He hid in the Philistines. The Philistines was where the giant that he killed was from. He was the champion of Israel hiding out with the Philistines. This is a different part of the story, isn't it? In fact, if you read about it, you know what you'll find? David actually had to pretend to be insane. This man who was the champion that nothing seemed to be able to stop now was hiding. And after he went there, they didn't even kill him because they thought he's so diminished. They let him go. And he hid out in caves. And while he was in the cave, he wrote this. Psalms 34, verse 6. In fact, if you've never read that one, I would highly recommend reading the whole thing if you're struggling today. You're in a low place. It's pretty good. But he says this poor man cried out, and the Lord heard him and saved him from all of his troubles. If you could circle something today, I would circle the word cried. I use this in a new King James Version because I just like that it uses the word. In NIV it says call out, which is the same thing. But the reason why I wanted to use the word cry out, you'd have to understand how you feel when you're desperate. That's how it feels. If you're going to dig deep, you might be going, what does this have to do with foundation? And I'll tell you this, it has everything. What David did here was the first step that changed his life. I don't know that he would have got it if he hadn't been in the depths of despair. So if you are, maybe God's doing a work you can't understand. But can I tell you this? A principle for digging deep, the first principle, is that depth begins with surrender. That what God was doing in the cave was he was preparing David in the cave for the palace. By the way, he spent a long time there. Over 10 years he spent in obscurity, in a place that he would have thought was a worthless experience, yet sometimes the obscurity is where you learn how to go deep. You want to know why it's important? We're going to show you today why it was so important in David's life. Because if you had the palace without the depth, when the storms come, you will be crushed. And David had learned, and you can go read the Psalms, and many of the Psalms that David wrote, you'll learn that he had a depth to him. It says in another place that David was a man after God's own heart. I think a big portion of that is because he was anchored. His foundation was deep. So when the storms came, he didn't fall apart. Maybe if you're going through something today, you needed to hear that. And what you do in these moments is going to be important. If you want to be able to go down deep and be anchored into the rock, the first step is surrender. Surrender to God. It leads us to the main passage I want to look at today. We fast forward in time to when David was 40 years old. He had spent nearly 10 years in obscurity, and now he had become king. It's a whole process you can read for yourself. Now the tables have turned. Now he's successful. And not only is he successful, he's militarily successful. Now, I'll give you just one side note. God didn't just build David in the cave. He gave him the greatest army the world has ever seen in that cave. The most mighty warriors that the planet has ever known came out of that. So it shows you that God can do a lot in obscurity. That was my point. And he learned depth there. He learned to depend on God there. And so when he became the king, he had tremendous success. The people loved him. They felt like his words were like speaking to an angel of God. That's what they said about him. But not only that, but he actually defeated all the enemies, and he had peace on all sides. That's an amazing feat. By age 40, he'd been through a lot. Then he had a dream. That's what I want to talk about today. He built a palace, and they had a tremendous prosperity, and he started to look at the thought that God lives. The presence of God in Israel was in a tent called the tabernacle. And he got thinking to himself, they had the tabernacle, which was a great thing. It came from Moses way back when they were traveling. That's why he was in a tent versus a building, that his presence in the Ark of the Covenant was in this tent. And he thought to himself, I live in a palace. I mean, God should have a better house for us to come and worship. In fact, here's what it says, First Chronicles 22:7. He said, I had it in my heart to build a house for the name of the Lord my God. In fact, he didn't just do it unadvised. He actually brought in the prophet Nathan, and he said, Nathan, do you think that's a good idea? And Nathan immediately said, that's a great idea. I mean, it's a good dream, David. Go and do. Go do it. And then, before Nathan left the room, the word of the Lord came. Here's what the word of the Lord was, verse 8. But this word of the Lord came to me. You have shed much blood and have fought many wars. You are not to build a house for my name because you have shed much blood on the earth in my sight. So David had an amazing dream, and God said no. Why? Think about it for a second. Why did God say no? Because you've shed much blood. What? The reason why I'm saying what, I want to make sure you know what blood we're talking about. David was 40. Now, later on, some of you guys are in the Bible, and that's a good thing, but you might not know the timeline. I want to make sure you get the timeline. He had not sinned his great sin with Bathsheba, where he had an affair, and then he didn't actually kill her husband, but he had her put on the front line, so it was equivalent to murder is what he did. That's not the blood we're talking about here, though. Why did I shed much blood on the earth, if David asked? Because you told me to. That's like looking at a soldier and saying, you have a dream, but you did the hard thing for the country, and now we're saying you can't be part of it because you shed blood. You got to be kidding, right? Let me ask you, how do you feel when God says no to a good dream that you have? A good plan that you have? Angry? Resentful? Bitter? Quit? That's how you treat me? It was a good thing I wanted, and then you said something like that to me? Is that how you do? Do you have malicious obedience? You know what I'm talking about with that? Fine, if that's how it's going to be. I'll do what you say, right? But with a heart that's saying, I hope you see how wrong you are to do that because of who I am. Now, I want to show you what David did, and I want to explain the reason why this has to do, because you might be wondering, what does this have to do with foundation? It has everything. I believe the response that David gave was because he had a deep foundation. I'll show you his response. It's found in the book of 2 Samuel 7. In 1 Chronicles, he's actually looking back, and I wanted to read it in real time. Here was his response. 2 Samuel 7, verse 18. Then King David went in and he sat before the Lord. And he said, who am I, sovereign Lord? And what is my family that you have brought me this far? He sat before the Lord without anger. He sat before the Lord without bitterness or without quitting or malicious obedience. Instead, you know what he did? This is how you anchor yourself. You want to know how you draw from the anchor the depth? He remembered. I remember who I am in you. I remember what you've done for me. You see, he looked back at his life and he remembered, right, what God had done. That he anointed him king when he was just a teenage boy. When Samuel the prophet came, Did you know that David was out in the fields as a shepherd boy? And when Samuel said, "Hey, I'm here in this little place," I want to pause there because we sing about Bethlehem because Jesus was also born there, and we say little town of Bethlehem like it's quaint. That's not what they meant by little. You know what they meant? They meant that it was small. You know who doesn't like to be called small? Men, warriors. That's an insult, right? And by the way, it means trifling is what the word means. It means backwoods. It means like you're from, we'll just stop there, right? You're from Black Creek or something, you know. You're like, man, you're out in the boondocks, right? I mean, you're just backwoods country bumpkins. That's what Bethlehem was for them. It's true. And Samuel comes to this little podunk place and he asks Jesse, "Show me all your sons." And he shows him, he has a whole bunch of sons. And so they all stand before him. And then they finally get to and he goes, "Do you have any more?" And he's like, "I don't know." And he actually didn't even remember he had David. And they were like, "Yeah, go get him. He's in the field. We're actually hiding him because he's just, dumb shepherd boy." That's how much it's doing. And I remember when you have me anointed after nobody else believed in me, you know what that causes? That's where God is helping him. Deep foundation. And I remember when I went out to the battlefield, my brothers were the warriors, I wasn't, and I saw the giant Goliath, and the power of the Holy Spirit came on me, and I slayed him. I went into the battle with no sword. He killed him with a sling. I probably don't have to hum a few bars of that. It's one of the most well-known stories in the world. By the way, he left with Goliath's sword that day. You made me a warrior. I remember. He's drawing from the foundation. Are you seeing that? He's drawing from the depths in this success. I don't want to make it sound like God only works when it's hard. I'm saying, but when there's victory, God in the depths. But see, more than that, I remember after that, when I thought I was this great kid with all this thing, and you gave me a father in Saul, and then he turned on me, and I couldn't have got any lower. I remember seething at the mouth and falling down like a crazy person because part of it was me pretending and part of it was I felt crazy. Did you know that God can anchor you in that? And when God delivers you from that, don't forget it, that you can remember. You can anchor yourself to a foundation is what he's saying. When I was in the cave for 10 years and I wrote, "This poor man cried." And the Lord heard him and delivered him out of all of his troubles. You want to know why David didn't respond like a lot of us do? I know, because I do too, right? It's because he was anchored. You see it? Because he remembered. It goes on to say this, verse 20, "What more can David say to you? For you know your servant, sovereign Lord. For the sake of your word and according to your will, you have done this great thing and made it known to your servant. How great you are, sovereign Lord. There is no one like you. There is no God but you, as we have heard with our own ears." He's remembering who God is. Not just what God has done for him, but who his trust is in, God. He uses a phrase that if you want to go back and you circle it, how many times he says, "Sovereign Lord, sovereign Lord." You know, as I was thinking about that, I have a memory because I preach, so it just comes back to me, right? And so in the first message, you know who else used that phrase, sovereign Lord? Samson. In the worst part of despair, that's what we preached about in the first message, what was this person who messed his life up so bad, but at the end, you know what he cried out? "Sovereign Lord, remember me." It's the same thought. You know why I bring it up? Not so I can just say a bunch of trivial things. I'm saying it because I go, this isn't just a David thing. This is a principle of God throughout the word. God will hear you when you cry out, "Sovereign Lord," no matter good times, bad times. When you've messed it up, you can cry out, "Sovereign Lord." Did you know that when you felt done wrong, when you felt maybe you're slighted, you could cry out, "Sovereign Lord. It's remembering God, who he is, and that he is in control. David is anchoring himself. Do you see it? I want to show you what happens next. We'll go back to 1 Chronicles, verse 5. After he prays all this and he's before the Lord, he says, therefore I will make preparations for it. So David went out and made extensive preparations before his death. Okay, what? Did you not hear what God said? Did you get hit in the head, David? I'm sorry. Because you're going, God said no, and you just said you're going to start making extensive preparations. I thought he said no. He did. He said no to you being the builder. And David didn't use malicious obedience. You see that? Because David was anchored, because David had a deep foundation, he didn't take that as a personal affront. Instead, what he did was he embraced the role that God gave him, which was the preparer. See, he understood something. I'm the warrior that clears off the deck, that gets it ready for the person that's going to build. But what I will do, I'll provide all the materials before his death. The way it reads, it almost makes it sound like, and I want to make sure we're clear, this is not that he was getting ready to die in the next year. He's 40 years old. He has 30 years ahead of him. That means it's a long thing that he committed to. 30 years. In fact, he goes on to describe it for us. Then he called for his son. Solomon, and charged him to build a house for the Lord, the God of Israel. That's investment. He called out not only investment in stuff, but it's a person. You know who can't invest in other people? Insecure people. David didn't have a confidence problem because his confidence, you know what I'm talking about? His confidence was because he had a foundation in God that was deep. Or else he would have messed this whole thing up like most insecure people that are building high but have no depth. But he didn't. He had depth. He went on to say to his son, verse 11, now my son, the Lord be with you. And may you have success and build the house, the Lord your God, as he said you would. I have taken great pains to provide for the temple of the Lord 100,000 talents of gold, 1,000,000 talents of silver. And then he goes on and on and on. And then he says, now begin the work, and the Lord be with you. 30 years he invested. In the good times and in the bad times. You know, David's life wasn't perfect. I don't know if you knew that. You can read about it for yourself if you want. 30 years from then, halfway into it, he had an affair with Bathsheba, made a huge mistake. Had somebody murdered, and it tainted his whole kingdom. And not only that, but it messed up his family, and he had huge problems in his family. But even in all of that, he stayed true to continuing to work for God. He repented of it, but he kept working. You know why I'm telling you that? Because some of you have made mistakes. Can I share some of them? I'm just playing. I am joking. I just want to make sure I had you. Anyway, you guys are really leaning. Like, what? Yeah, that's right. I know a lot about all of us. We all got. By the way, I don't know many of us that don't have mistakes. You know, only people I know that haven't made mistakes in the room is people I don't know. Everybody else, you're pretty messed up. I'm pretty messed up. I'm saying that because here's what I know. It's not if you're going to make mistakes. I hope you don't make the mistakes David did. I hope you're clear. Nobody gets out of this unscathed. Don't let your mistakes, are you listening? Keep you from your God-given mission. David didn't, and it was bad. How could David be a man after God's own heart? Because after his mistake, he repented, and he kept working. He kept working on something that was far beyond himself. And so can you. he charged Solomon, his son, here's everything I got. David's never going to see this. Solomon was the builder, but David was the preparer. I want to be clear about something. Solomon was the richest, wisest king who ever lived. That's what the Bible says. He did not provide one material thing for the temple. David provided it all, including the builders. But David never saw it. The preparer. When the Queen of Sheba came, she said, the half has not been told of Solomon and his splendor and the temple, the greatest temple the world has ever seen. It went beyond David. God shared this story not just for David, but for you. David was able to do it because he had a deep foundation. And if you want that foundation today, I want to give you a couple takeaways that maybe you'll need. I hope you'll write them down. 4 prayers. 4 prayers, because I do believe that prayer is the way that you can go deep spiritually. Prayer number 1, the prayer of surrender. Lord, I surrender. That's the prayer. It's pretty simple, huh? You know what it means though, right? When you surrender? The control. It's interesting David could do that. I think he could do it because he had a deep foundation and he had learned it in obscurity. You know who sometimes has a hard time is warriors that are successful, right? I depend on me. Great men struggle. But if you want to get this right, you want faith that goes beyond you. You know where it starts? Surrender to God. He has a plan beyond what you can understand. So the first prayer is surrender. Stop striving. Stop trying to figure it out. Just sit before the Lord. Lord, I surrender. The prayer, number 1, surrender. Prayer 2, the prayer of remembrance. Remember. Lord, remind me who you are and what you've done. Maybe use an ancient word, sovereign Lord. You know what it means? God is in control. I remember who you are, God. I remember where I came from. You come from small beginnings. If you have an anchor, it don't matter. You come from a rough background. You're wrong. People told you that, but it don't matter. God's been faithful, right? You remember what God has done for you? Has he brought you through? Tap into that. That's your anchor. Remember the grace of God. Remember, you didn't do this on your own. That's why last week's message was so important, right? That it's by God's grace alone, through faith in Jesus Christ alone, not of works, so that no one can boast. Remember. Prayer 3. Receive. How do we receive? Lord, I release the role I wanted, and I receive the role you have given. That's a little weird to say it that way, isn't it? You know what it means? It means empty-handed. Not the way I see it, but I can receive because I'm opening my hands to God. You put in or take out whatever you want to do because I trust you. Do you? Or do you grip things and you hold on to them? I remember Chuck Swindoll, who I listened to a lot, he had a lady that attended his church for many years. Her name was Corrie ten Boom, and she had survived a Nazi concentration camp. And she said, Chuck, let me share with you this principle. She said, whatever God gives you, hold it loosely. Let him put in or take out, because if you grasp it like this, it's going to hurt when he has to pry your hands open. Do you trust God? Has he done enough for you to trust him to put in or take out? Are you anchored enough that you can do that, or you're going to mess the whole thing up? You get it? And prayer number 4, invest. The prayer of investment. Lord, let me be faithful. Let me faithfully build what you've entrusted me to. Even if I never see it finished. Huh? I think the way I'd like to end today is with a verse. Acts chapter 13. It's kind of a strange place to go to wrap up the story of David. He's mentioned there. Acts chapter 13 and verse 36. It says, now when David had served God's purpose in his own generation, he fell asleep and he was buried with his ancestors. I mean, who could hope for more than that? Until you read the next part. And his body decayed. Wow. Why would you mention that? Right? You talk about the legacy of David and you mention he served his generation. That's all great. We're all celebrating David. And then you say his body is decaying. Who wants to think about that? Until you read the next part. But the one whom God raised from the dead did not see decay. While it's graphic, it's true. If David only tapped in to what David could do, it's one generation, and then it's dead and decayed. But Jesus Christ, God's one and only Son, he served his purpose, which was to die for the sins of the world. But he didn't stay in the ground. He rose from the dead, proving that he's God. And he did not see decay. By the way, neither did his vision. David was part of that. You go back and you read Matthew chapter 1, you're going to see the lineage of Jesus Christ. And you know the first name it mentions, he's not the first person that was in the lineage. He's the first person mentioned, David, in the line of David. David's kingdom will last forever. Not because David is so great, because he tapped into something deep. He was anchored to a foundation that knows no end. You get that? It's pretty powerful. That's David's legacy. You know, I've seen it in the people that have come before us. Do you have people like that? That maybe you haven't thought about for a while. Maybe you should. The people that prayed for you. The people, the reason why you're here is because they didn't give up on you. They didn't get to see you, though. One of those people for me was my grandma. That's a picture. We were at her grave a few years ago. We went to Minnesota for my aunt's birthday. It was her 90th birthday, and so we got to go there. And so the cousins went out to the grave, and we all stood around it, my grandpa and grandma. My grandfather died 20 years before her. I think she always wondered, my grandma was one of the kindest, gentlest, most disciplined people I've ever met. When you look at Little House on the Prairie, she lived it. Her parents were homesteaders. She was born in 1900, so that tells you something, right? They grew up in South Dakota. That tells you something too. It's rough, right? She was tough. She wasn't a speaker. She was never gregarious. My grandfather was, but she wasn't. She was a pastor's wife in the background, served forever, lived 20 years without her husband. Didn't complain, though. That wasn't her. But you know what all of my cousins knew when we stood around that grave? Even when she got old, every morning she'd wake up at 4 a.m. and she'd read her Bible and then pray. And she had a long list. You know who was on that list? We were on that list. She prayed for us. You want to know why she could do it? Because even after she lost him, her whole life, that was her whole life. I mean, she had been through the Depression. She had been through everything. You think 1900 to 1997. She had seen a lot. But she didn't go out bitterly. She went out praying for all of us. By the way, I wasn't really following God so closely, even when she went out, but definitely not after. But I think those prayers are a big part. You starting to see? Because she was anchored in something that led beyond herself. A principle that she lived by. Only one life will soon be past. Only what's done for Jesus Christ will last. You could anchor yourself to it if you want to. Can I pray for you? Let's stand for prayer. Father, I thank you so much for your word, and I just pray in this moment that I move kind of out of the way. Human words won't do what needs to be done to the heart. So, Lord, we pray in the Spirit that you'll touch the insides of us today, the one that desperately needs you, the one that doesn't know you, but they're here, they know about you, but they don't know you. They've never let you in. I pray they will. Just like David. This poor man cried and the Lord heard him and delivered him from all of his troubles. That's where somebody is. They don't know that you could do it. They can't figure it out, but it's time to surrender. This is where we lay it down. This is where we go, I can't do it anymore. That's where somebody's at. They can't, but you can. You're about to take them deeper. Lord, I pray for the one that does follow you and they're struggling like David. They're in a cave and they don't know why. But it's because you want to take them deeper. Before you build up, you've got to go down so that they're deep and rooted in you. You don't need flash in the pan, do you, Lord? In fact, I don't know that you care that much about it. I don't think you care as much about some of the things that we measure. You care about depth. You care about faithfulness. I pray for that person that's struggling, and maybe they're struggling because they see other people around them blessed, and they don't know why they have to be in this situation, but it's because you're anchoring them to something deep that when the storm comes, they won't fall. You're going to build something in their life, but you have to build it down before you can go up. Maybe they needed to hear that. The hidden work. I'm praying for them, God. Give them the patience to do that. Lord, I also pray for those of us that are getting older, like David. Lord, that we've made mistakes. That's the hard part about growing older is that, Lord, we do have some things that we regret, some things that we could resent, some things that we need to lay down again. But in the way that we do that is that we draw from that anchor. We have a choice, is what you're telling us. We can build with no foundation, just on what we think. And maybe we'll even last for one generation, but what you're calling us to is so much more. That's why I'm praying this over our church today, Lord. I hope we don't miss it. I hope we don't have some bitter epilogue because we don't like the way things are going in the country and we don't like the way things are. And we could be resentful about the way people are treating us, but we can't see beyond because the vision isn't ours, it's yours. We're the preparers for what comes next. And it's time that we hold on to the true rock. We build on the true rock, or everything else will go away. It is true. Only one life will soon be past. Only what's done for you, Lord, will last. I pray we anchor ourselves to that. I pray you make us those kind of people in that kind of church, and we'll give you all the honor and glory and praise. In Jesus' name, amen. Guys, if you need prayer today, we'll have prayer partners. For everybody else, God bless you. Have a great week.